Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here in person and joining us here for the Emerging Researcher Spotlight series. And also thank you for joining us online. Please tell us where you're joining us from in the chat box. I would like to start by acknowledging that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. My name is Annemieke Verenhorst, and I'm the Associate Vice President, Research. And being a member of the community, I feel extremely proud to be part of water research networks that work in partnership with First Nations in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So there's a lot of excitement happening here at the University of Manitoba in terms of research. Yesterday night, we hosted the Knowledge Exchange, and the topic was about brain and gut and how they work together in health and disease. And the members of the Rady Faculty of Health Sciences presented on some groundbreaking research that is currently going on. And it was nice to see there were many alumni in the room, and it was a really, really nice event. And so here we are today, another fantastic event, and this time we're going to hear about the groundbreaking research that you are doing as emerging researchers. So we're going to feature individuals that have been here for less than a decade, and we will hear about their research. So the reason why we do these things is because we hope that you have time to make an initial connection with each other and perhaps then start a new collaboration in interdisciplinary research. Another reason is that we have students coming to these events, and someone was telling me the other day that students were finding their mentor for undergraduate and graduate research projects that they want to work on. So tell your students they're free to come out. Also, please mention it in your undergraduate classes because we also welcome undergraduate students. So today we're going to hear from 7 speakers, and here are their names. And after we have listened to the presentations, we have a question and answer round. If you're online, you can put your question in the chat box. If you're here in person, I will walk around with a microphone, and then we will have a question and answer round. So today we're going to hear from the speakers about a range of topics, and here's a word cloud of what you can expect. So with that, I would like to welcome then the first speaker of today, and her name is Kirstin Brink, and so please welcome Dr. Brink.
Thank you. Okay, so this morning, I'll talk to you a bit about some growth marks in biomineralized tissues. So I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Earth Sciences, and I'm a paleontologist. So when I'm talking about biomineralized tissues, I'm referring to fossil material and to material from living animals. So for example, if you were to take a leg bone from a Tyrannosaurus rex and cut it open and make a slide out of it to shine light through it, you can find rings inside of that bone, just like you would like tree rings, for example. They're indicated by the white arrows. Same thing with a tooth. This is a tooth from a marine reptile called a mosasaur that lived in Manitoba about 80 million years ago. And same thing, if you cut it open, you can see there are lines inside that tooth, and those lines actually form daily. And then the same thing, this is an otolith. This is an ear stone from a modern fish. And you can see indicated with all the numbers on there that these tissues also grow incrementally. So they form one of these lines every year. So using these biomineralized tissues, there are three main research questions that I'm focusing on in the lab, and I'll show you some examples of each of those. And the first is, how do these growth marks form? So this is an interesting sample. At the top, there's a picture of a tooth that's been cut and polished. And you can see there's a black ring inside the tooth. And if you shine light through it, it actually turns transparent, kind of yellowy or orangey color. And this is a tooth from a mosasaur. And it was collected near the Morden, Miami area in Manitoba. And we were trying to figure out what this ring is. Is it something that formed during the life of the mosasaur? Like maybe it was reacting to some kind of a stress and it formed this marker in the tooth, which we do see in a lot of modern animals. Or is it something that happened because of the fossilization process? So it is 80 million years old, so maybe it just changed color while it was becoming a fossil. So the bottom picture is a scanning electron micrograph, and it shows at the top there's all these black spots, and that is what the normal tissue looks like. And at the bottom, there's all of those little tubules are filled in with something. So right now we're doing some geochemical work to try and figure out, is it filled in with something that might have happened during the life of the animal? Or is it some other kind of mineral that filled it in while it was becoming a fossil? And then by using that information, we can try to interpret the life history of this mosasaur. Was it living in a very stressful environment in this inland seaway in Manitoba? Or are we just learning a lot about how these animals became fossils by trying to figure out what these lines are? The next question is, what can these growth marks tell us about extinct animal growth, development, and their appearance? So for this project, this was a paper that came out last year, and I was part of a team that wanted to try to figure out, do dinosaurs have lips or not? So if you look, there's these two skulls in the middle, one of them of the dinosaur on the right. One of them, when the mouth is closed, you can see the teeth sticking out, and this is more of a kind of Jurassic Park style dinosaur. Or there's the one in the middle and the bottom where when the mouth is closed, you don't see the teeth sticking out, and this is more of a lizard-like snout. So the teeth exposed is more similar to what we might see in a crocodile or an alligator, so when their mouth is closed, you can see the teeth. And part of my role in this project was to look at the structure of the teeth in dinosaurs to determine if there were some characteristics that would suggest it was more like a crocodile or more like a lizard. So looking at the way that the teeth actually get broken and worn down in an alligator, their teeth are always broken up because there's no lip to cover it and to protect it. Whereas in the lizards, their teeth are always really nice. Especially when they fossilize, they look really, really nice, as though they weren't broken and worn down throughout life. So this was just one little piece of evidence that we took from looking at these biomineralized tissues to help support the idea that these dinosaurs actually did have a lip covering their teeth. And it's kind of an interesting project, and the reaction that we got from people is, why is this important? Why should we think about why do dinosaurs have lips or not? And really what we're doing is we're taking these animals that have been portrayed as these big movie monsters, and we're showing people that, no, you can actually collect data and you can show that these are real animals, and they actually look like a real animal. And then the last project that we're working on in the lab is what can growth marks tell us about environmental change over short timescales? So this is a project looking at those fish otoliths. So the top picture here is a picture of the otolith, and you can see there's a line that's been run across it, but it's indicated with those white arrows. This line was created by a laser that was collecting geochemical information from the otolith. And if you look at image B, you can see some of those growth marks indicated with the black arrows. So with this geochemical information, we can actually look at the incorporation of different trace elements. This one right here is magnesium, or we could look at zinc or other kind of contaminants that might be found in the environment. And we can reconstruct the life history of this fish. So the project that we're doing right now is we're looking at fish that were caught in a lake near a closed down mine in the Flin Flon area that was mining zinc. So we're trying to see if that zinc is still present in the water, if it's being incorporated into the fish or not. And we're using that as an environmental indicator to look at the health of that lake and to see the effect of the mining over these long-term timescales. So that's just a really brief summary of all this really cool information we can get from biomineralized tissues and fossils and from living animals and like all of these secrets that are hidden in these incremental tissues. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirstin. That was fascinating. I told Kirstin that I always wanted to be a paleontologist, so that was fascinating. And I failed to mention that Dr. Brink is from the Clayton Riddle Faculty of Environment, Earth and Resources. So up next is Dr. Soodeh Saberian from the Faculty of Arts, and Soodeh studies environmental, health and behavioral economics. And her keywords that she submitted are air pollution, wildfires, mental health, and social cost. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Soodeh Saberian, an assistant professor in economics department. I'm going to talk about a joint project with Janet Carey at Princeton that is talking about looking for estimating mental health cost of wildfire. To start with, I'm going to remind you this news headline that we for sure saw last year, and we are going to see more this year because of the dry winter that we had. Seeing this, looking at this, or being impacted by very bad fire season last year brought us to this question. Now, there are rumors around talking about health effect of fires. What is the mental health effect? What we did was basically estimating 3 possible channels that fires can deteriorate your mental health. This is an actual picture that I took from Camp Luz. So this is actually happening, a fire that close to you. So direct effect was the first possible channel that can deteriorate your mental health because of evacuation. You are evacuated from your house, or you are not evacuated, but the park near you is affected, is burned by the fire, so you don't have any amenity to go for your weekend or camp over, and then your mental health is deteriorated, or your business might be burnt out, and then you economically is broken, and then you directly, your mental health is directly affected by fire. The second one, which is what I am more interested in, as there is basically zero estimates out there, is, I'm sorry, the effect of PM 2.5, the pollutants that comes from those fire, no matter how close you are to that fire, on your, looking at literature, brain. So those PM 2.5 that is coming from fire, and for your knowledge, it's very hard to be avoided because they're 10 times smaller than one of your hair. You can inhale them, and they will sit in your brain, and they will damage your brain, and therefore mental health. There are also literature showing that it will inflammate your nervous system and cause you depression or other kind of anxiety and other kind of mental health disease. The other thing is that what if you have climate anxiety and you see the news and starting being anxious because you have a kid that has asthma and you know that because of those fire, he might get attacked. So you start being anxious because there is fire 40,000 kilometers away from you, okay? So what we did in this ongoing project, we estimate all these possible channels that we could think of using fires all over Canada and US from 2006 to 2018, and our outcome variable is actual mental health hospitalization in all over Canada from 2006 to 2018. So if you are hospitalized in Canada for primary reasons as a mental health, I have you recorded in my data set. I'm not going to talk how I estimated these possible channels. Instead, I'm showing you a picture of every possible channel that I just talked about. This is a lady that is evacuated because of the fire in Nova Scotia last year. And I think we all can see that even if mother is not affected, at least kids are affected. They seem very depressed and sad because I think when I look for their study, they were out of their house for 80 days. This is how fire in BC is affecting air quality in Winnipeg. And I'm sure if you were here last July, we had at least 3 weeks of episodes of a smoky sky. So even if you don't have any pre-existing condition, looking at a sky that is covered by the plume of a smoke might think you that you don't feel well, right? And this is how, for now, we estimate the climate anxiety that I just talked about. Looking at Google search trend, it seems that the years that there are more fires, people, they were actually anxious and they look for fire. That might, if you are already suffering for some kind of anxiety, that might be a reason that trigger you to be hospitalized. And that's a cost. And this is the result of our study for now. We have estimated number of people that are affected by evacuations, by fire that are less than 100 kilometers that people are actually located. And also this is very, very small number, just assuming that those smoke can travel up to 2,000, though we show that there are pictures out there that show fires in Quebec can affect people in California even, depending on wind direction. And here we are. So we also see a positive, significant effect of one fire on length of hospitalization, including all this. For one extra fire that is more than 500 hectares, we see something around $2.9 billion cost of mental health alone. And that is huge. And for your information, up to now, none of the policies out there consider mental health effect of pollution. Just in 2020, after 15 years, WHO agreed to include asthma-related cost of pollution into policymakers, and before that, it was just mortality. And there are literature, including mine, showing that this pollution is affecting our decision making, our productivity, and here is mental health new channel. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Soodeh. That's so many numbers of people impacted. So thank you for letting us know about these important studies that you're leading. Oh, yeah. So next is Bruce Erickson, and he is from the Faculty of Environment, Earth and Resources. And Bruce studies the cultural politics of outdoor recreation and tourism to illustrate how colonial dispossessions of indigenous land and livelihoods is often justified through recreational practices, economic development, and even conservation efforts. So the key words to his presentation and research is leisure, colonialism, cultural geography, canoeing, and tourism. The floor is yours, Bruce.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here today, and thanks for this opportunity to talk about my research with you. So this is a mural that's part of a series of murals in Churchill, Manitoba, many of which are visited by those who come to Churchill to see polar bears, belugas, and northern lights, among other things. Now, this mural is titled Little Duck Lake, and it's based on the story of the dispossession and disastrous relocation of the Szilagyi Dene First Nation in northern Manitoba. It points to how the Szilagyi Dene were removed from their traditional territories around Little Duck Lake and pushed to Churchill because there was a belief that they were responsible for the decline of caribou numbers in their area. The federal government moved the community to Churchill without their consultation and without advance notice. So this mural asks people to think about the relationship between environmental crisis and colonialism, noting the ways that conservation science was used to achieve the aims of a colonial government. Now, I work in the field of cultural geography and environmental cultural studies, which means that I'm interested in the ways that we use and understand landscapes. As I think we all know, landscapes are often hotly contested in terms of who claims them, who has authority over them, and what is allowed to happen in them. And in Canada, much of that conflict is related to the history of colonialism. So as a cultural geographer, I pay specific attention to the different conflicts that animate how we understand places. And my particular focus is on those places we go to for outdoor recreation and leisure. That is, I'm interested in how outdoor recreation and leisure activities are involved in different conflicts over land. And in this case of the mural, I'm interested in what this mural teaches us about the politics and histories of that land. What ways does it frame these issues? What challenges are in the ways of this mural being used to better understand these conflicts? Now, the interesting thing about leisure and recreation is that these activities, whether it is tourism, hiking, or canoeing, are often seen as decidedly innocent activities. They're things that we partake in simply because we enjoy the activity itself. They're not supposed to be connected to how we vote or what our politics are or what we thought happened 50 years ago. The supposed neutrality then ends up hiding some of the conflicts and politics that are involved in these landscapes. Now, a lot of my research has focused on canoeing. Canoeing is sometimes believed to be a sort of national activity, a true Canadian experience. But in this alignment, there's often a set of politics that interferes with us understanding the actual history of colonialism in Canada. When I first started this research, it was clear that canoeing was often being used to sort of launder a story of the nation through this idea of the canoe as a gift from Indigenous peoples to settlers coming to these lands. And the fact that this story was told through leisure gave it a kind of authenticity and emotion to it. It sort of cleaned that narrative, setting the stage for a larger national denial of colonialism. And so this is what I focused on in my book, Canoe Nation. Now, in the past 15 years, this story has often been challenged. Indigenous groups are reclaiming and asserting the canoe as a significant part of their world, either through nation-to-nation relationship building or land-based education practices, or as ways of asserting rights over territory. And so a couple of years ago, a colleague and I were able to gather some of these stories to highlight the changing landscape of canoeing and how we might be rethinking this activity. And I'm continuing this research to ask how the increasing national attention in Canada to colonialism is changing our canoeing experiences and how we think about this activity, and also how this activity might be used to support Indigenous rights holders to achieve their goals. But beyond simply rethinking canoeing, I want to suggest that this research can help broaden our understanding of colonialism and help show us how we understand the conflicts that happen over these landscapes a little bit better. And now this becomes especially important as we move further into a world that is marked by climate change, biodiversity loss, and increasing pressures on ecosystems throughout the world. Leisure activities obviously have an impact on the environment, And many are actually using leisure as a tool to advocate for better ways of engaging with those landscapes and better ways of dealing with the environmental crisis more broadly. These responses will involve significant changes to the way that we use these lands and the way that we understand the landscapes, but they're also going to involve further conflicts over those landscapes as well. And so my research is asking, what is the potential for leisure and recreation to address both the environmental crisis and social justice? Leisure organizations, in fact, have long had a history for advocating for social change and care for marginalized groups. And so how is that legacy making its way into environmentally conscious leisure activities? But there's a danger here, as problems like climate change tend to overtake other concerns, where the argument is that climate change is such a huge and pressing issue that we can't worry about other things at the same time, that maybe social justice or equity or equality don't have the same demand in the present moment as climate change. But by looking at the ways in which both injustice and environmental consciousness are being used in our leisure activities in a changing environment, it's my hope that we can also illustrate pathways forward and show how we can bring both of those conversations into other dimensions of life. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruce. That was fascinating. So the next speaker is Mohammad Khan from the Faculty of Social Work. And Mohammad's research program focuses on economic and environmental justice for vulnerable and marginalized populations. And the keywords that he submitted are migration, migration theories, immigrants, economic justice, and decolonization. The floor is yours, Mohammad.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mohammad, an assistant professor of social work. The area of my research broadly is economic justice. To put it simply, economic growth is important, but the equitable distribution of economic resources and opportunities among the members of our society is equally important, if not more important. And the premise of my research is that some historical events that are exploitative and oppressive, such as imperialism, colonialism, and slavery, contributed greatly to the unequal distribution of resources, economic resources and opportunities in our society, and continue to do so through neoliberal market economy that created structural and systemic barriers and challenges for marginalized people to achieve economic well-being. So the focus of my research is to identify these structural and systemic barriers and challenges and find ways to neutralize or address them to achieve economic well-being and uphold economic justice. One of my projects funded by SHARC, I'm examining the economic well-being of immigrants in Manitoba through a transformative mixed method approach to economic justice. The major objectives of this study are identifying the challenges and barriers to economic well-being of immigrants, examining how Canadian immigration and labor market policies influence the economic well-being of immigrants, and understanding the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the economic well-being of immigrants. And I'm using a mixed method approach, as I mentioned, which includes qualitative interviews, analysis of Canadian migration and immigration and labor market policies, and also surveys. In my another project, I'm examining the changing nature and dynamic of international migration. There are a number of migration theories that explain international migration, such as classical economic theory of migration, a new economic theory of migration, segregated labor market theory of migration, institutional theory of migration, world system theory of migration, and you can name many other. But my understanding is that there is a missing piece here, that these theories are not sufficiently explaining why skilled immigrants, particularly who have stable livelihood and steady life in their country of origin, why they decide to migrate in the first place. And the assumptions this study is based on are, I believe, the traditional pull factors are not strong enough to pull skilled migrants. The extreme push factors make it happen. And migrant receiving industrially developed countries not only take advantage of these extreme push factors, but also contribute to those push factors to a great extent. I describe this situation as hunting migrants, catching the big fishes in the muddy marshlands. And I use a community fishing analogy to describe this situation. You see a number of pictures here, and there is a practice of community fishing in South Asian countries, particularly in Bangladesh, and I'm taking that community fishing analogy to describe what I just said. After monsoon, when water gets settled down in the marshland, fishes take shelter in the relatively deeper pockets of water. And if you go to fish alone, if you go alone to catch fish that time, it will be very hard to catch any fish, let alone big fishes. So that time, what villagers do, they plan together. And they come to a place in a certain day, certain time, all together, all ages of people and all genders, they gather together, and what they do, they jump into water at the same time. They scream, they walk through. After a while, water gets muddied. When water gets muddied, it creates lack of oxygen in the water. Now, the fishes feel suffocated due to lack of oxygen in the water, and also get scared. Now the big fishes, they leave their safe haven, the shelter, and they start moving here and there. And this is the time, the opportunity you can catch big fishes. Even you can catch fishes without a fishing net or fishing tool. Even a kid can catch a big fish because the big fishes come to the shore just for survival, looking for a safe haven for their survival. So this is what happened in international migration as well. Like civil war, political violence, even natural disaster, that's the time that destroyed people's life, and now they try to find just a safe places. And this is also an opportunity for migrants seeking industrially developed countries. They take opportunities and only pick the desired immigrants over undesired immigrants. So I sum up these findings in a way that industrially developed countries, immigrant seeking countries, they are in competition to hunt highly wealthy and skilled immigrants. And they take advantage of the pre-existing war, naturally occurred war, sometimes artificially occurred, catastrophic events such as civil war, political violence, war, natural disasters. And not only take advantage, sometimes they contribute to those push factors to a great extent in the first place. And industrially developed countries, migrant-seeking countries also use paperclip policy, meaning that they use fast-track immigration policy to attract the desired immigrants over undesired immigrants. Like Project Paperclip was adopted by United States right after the Second World War. Also, climate change and environmental pollution. You will see that industrially developed countries are more responsible for climate change. They emit the most of the greenhouse gases. But there is a differential impact of it. Developing countries, poor countries, those are the most victim. And people are forced from those countries to leave their place, become climate change and environmental refugees. So overall, I sum up this situation as catching the big fishes in the muddy marshland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph, to tell us about your important research. The next researcher is Dr. Joseph Asomah from the Faculty of Arts. And Joseph's research focuses on socio-legal studies, criminology, criminal justice and corruption cases, effects and responses from influential actors, including governments, the media, civil society, and the international community. And the keywords that Joseph submitted are corruption, democracy, government accountability, constitutionalism, and the rule of law. The floor is yours, Joseph.
Thank you very much for having me. My work focuses on corruption, which involves the abuse of power to serve private ends, and it occurs both in public and private sector as well. And why is that important? If you look at what Ban Ki-moon, former US Secretary General, says, that says it all. And I always like to read what is there. So when public money is stolen for private gain, it means fewer resources to build schools, hospitals, roads, and water treatment facilities. When foreign aid is diverted into private bank accounts, major infrastructure projects come to a halt. Corruption enables fake or substandard medicines to be dumped on the market and hazardous waste to be dumped in landfill sites and in oceans. The vulnerable suffer first and worse, and that's those adverse effects are not far-fetched if we look at the case of Ghana, as the pictures you see on the screen indicate. So for Ghana, for example, it loses about $4 billion annually to corruption, and that money could have well been invested in improving infrastructure in some of the areas, as you see on the screen. So for example, pregnant women give birth and sleep on bare floor at Kumasi South Hospital. How should that be, okay, when the money is being diverted? So we have schools, children sitting on the floor, and so on and so forth. And I think that if we have more than even some of the estimates, they indicate as much as 19 billion. So if we have that money being invested, I think that it will go a long way to improve the critical infrastructure. So my research interests focus around these questions. What drives corruption? And let me say also that corruption is everywhere, but it's more a problem in developing countries. Okay. So first, what drives corruption, and what are the effects of corruption? And the effects we saw from the screen, the pictures over there. And how best can society combat corruption? Okay. And normally, democracy is portrayed as one of the solutions to addressing corruption in developing countries. So part of my research question for this particular presentation focuses on whether in Ghana's Fourth Republic, democracy should be blamed for corruption, because we still have corruption despite the country's return to democratic rule in 1992. So for democracy to help address corruption, it is supposed to be anchored. So, but first of all, let me give a theoretical grounding in terms of the relationship between democracy and corruption. So normally the assumption is that as a country practices democracy, for a long time, normally the literature puts it at 10 years, so minimum. That is enough for the country to begin entrenching structures of accountability to be able to deal with corruption. So that means the longer you have democratic governance, we expect that levels of corruption will come down, okay? But that is not the case in Ghana and in most other countries. So I focus on, interviewing people and also doing document analysis and so on and so forth to understand Ghanaians' perspectives in terms of whether they think that, democracy, is also contributing to corruption in Ghana or what. So that's the focus for this particular one. But through the analysis, I came to settle on this to frameworks. First, constitutionalism, and I also talk about briefly about the rule of law. And the constitutionalism, as you see there, is all about checks and balances, having constitution that distributes power equally among the three branches of government to ensure that there is there are checks and balances. And then the rule of law, making sure that we enforce the law fairly and equally, regardless of whoever have violated the law. And that is also very important. And so if you don't have these two important pillars, then corruption is likely to thrive in a democratic environment as it would in any other form of government. So just to share with you just a little bit of the findings. So for constitutionalism, for example, the power structures as enshrined in the 1992 Constitution undercuts or compromises constitutionalism in several ways, and as one of the interviewees pointed out. The Constitution has given the executive president every power to do whatever he or she wants, and I believe it's a bigger problem. For instance, any political party that comes into power sacks almost everybody who has a public institution and replaces them with party loyalists and allies. And when we have a situation like that, so it's like they try to cover each other's back, okay? So nothing gets done in terms of fighting corruption effectively. And then we have a recent case where an auditor general that was seen widely by Ghanaians as effective in applying the Constitution to make sure that those who steal public funds refund or are prosecuted, all of a sudden was removed by the current president, President Akufo-Addo, and the reason, was that, he attempted to investigate a corruption scandal involving a very powerful member of the government. And that led to, so first of all, they asked him to proceed on leave, without any valid reason. And when he was supposed to return to office, then they said, your appointment is over, go on retirement. And so that's one way. And it shouldn't have been the case if we have proper checks and balances. And so that also speaks to the extensive powers of the president in doing whatever he or she wants. And the parliament is also not effective. In fact, it's an appendage of the executive. And so they also lobby for power, for ministerial positions, and they are there just to serve the interests of the executive. And so when we have like that, the checks and balances are not effective. And then another aspect of it is the rule of law. And as one of the interviewees pointed out, government officials can get away with corruption. So the government in power often do not deal with government officials whose alleged corrupt practices have been exposed. Instead, the government often attempts to shield these corrupt officials. And they are able to do that because they have their people in key positions across the country. And then the failure of the courts to uphold the rule of law. So they also appoint members of the judiciary, and normally they appoint judges who are likely to serve their interests. So this is what one interviewee or participant said. The legal regime is not helping, so it is making democracy, excuse me to say, stupid, because even when there are facts that have indicted me, the law courts will be lingering on the issue for 4 or 5 years and so on and so forth. And who is interested in that long litigation? So, and then the State Attorney General Department also undermines the rule of law. And there is a very popular documentary called the Cash for Justice Investigative Documentary, which is available online. And we have cases where the state attorney who are supposed to prosecute cases are themselves corrupt. And when you have something like that, it's not likely that the rule of law will be advanced. So that's also another thing that came through. So conclusions, should democracy be blamed for corruption in Ghana's Fourth Republic? My conclusion is that without advancing constitutionalism and the rule of law, corruption is bound to happen in both democratic societies. It's likely to happen in democratic societies as it would in any form of government, whether that is autocratic and so on and so forth. So, and that is normally the case when the rules of the games are consistently violated without consequences. Okay? So corruption must be made a high-risk enterprise as one of the ways to address corruption, that anybody who is caught in violating the laws or embezzling public funds must be made to face the full rigors of the law, regardless of who they are. Okay. So as part of my work on corruption, I also look at, I'm interested in questions such as this for future research. Can e-government reduce corruption? If public services are moved online, can that help address corruption? So it's not only political corruption that involves the big fishes, but it's also widespread in government departments and so on and so forth. So can the traditional media also play a constructive role in addressing corruption? And then a social media, which is the new media, be a vital communication tool and platform for combating corruption, and not only in Ghana, but everywhere, and especially the developing country context. Can civil society also play any meaningful role in fighting corruption? So that is also very important aspect to look into going forward. So that is all for this presentation, and once again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for teaching us about corruption. And the next speaker is Wenlong Yuan from the Asper School of Business. And Wenlong research focuses on entrepreneurships in large firms, entrepreneurial learning from failure and behaviors of academic entrepreneurs. And the keywords about the research are effectuation, entrepreneurship, and bottom-up strategy. So take it away, Wenlong.
Thank you. When you say this person is from the business school, your immediate reaction is, okay, this person is going to talk about money. At business school, we also do research in other fields, such as corporate social responsibility. But your stereotype is correct. I'm going to talk about business related, and we are going to talk about money part. So if you are going to start to think about a business, the first thing that many people will ask you about is, what's your plan? This is the traditional way of thinking of running a business. But there are issues. It has been there, the mainstream idea has been there for like 40 years. But there are problems with this. For example, if you are saying, I am looking for a mate, I'm not, but let's assume. And you probably say, I'm going to have this, what kind of person do I want? Probably say this person, I want the person to be brilliant. I probably want the person to be beautiful. I probably want the person to exercise a lot together with me. You list 20 criteria. And then this is the traditional planning. After you also say, what is the list of my choices? So for every potential candidate, you are going to use these 20 criteria to do a detailed evaluation. And if you are stats savvy, you probably say, I'm going to do the weighted average of all these candidates, and I give a number to the person, and finally you get the top person. And so you get the lucky person, you go to see the person says, well, you spent so much time doing your planning and your detailed analysis, and now I have got married and I have 2 kids already. So what I'm saying here is, when there is lots of uncertainty involved in your business, the traditional way of doing detailed planning is not going to work very well, although we're still doing lots of business plan competition all the time. So what is the suggestion? The suggestion is to move away from the traditional think first strategy to act first strategy. That is the principle of effectuation, which has been there for around 25 years. The basic idea of this principle is to tell you that you should act first. We are not really saying that you should go to see somebody and saying, can you marry me? That's not what we're saying. What we are saying here is there are different ways for you to start your business. I won't talk about all of them. The first one is the means. What it means is you look at what you have, what kind of resources you have. For example, how much money do you have? How many connections do you have? You go from there to experiment with different ideas and to pick the ones, get some initial signal about the potential success or failure of the project, and make a relatively informed decision about what you want to do. The second one is affordable loss. What it means is, when you think about your research, for example, it's almost like running a business. Traditional way is you're going to say, is there any possibility for me to win Nobel Prize? But I don't really think about that. But you probably say, is there any possibility for me to get a Nature publication? That's your objective. What we are seeing here is you think about the affordable loss. What it means is, to what extent am I willing to spend this much time, let's say 3 weeks, or 3 years on a certain project without getting much? So this is the affordable loss principle. So there have been quite a few articles in this area, but there is some major issue. That's what we have seen. And let's talk about this example. For you, as a researcher, you are saying, I think I'm willing to lose 1 year if this project doesn't really end up with anything, no major publication at all. You are fine with that. That's good. As an entrepreneur, that's your individual choice. But when you go from an entrepreneur to a small firm, for example, if you are, let's say you have 10 graduate students, and you are saying, this project, I think I'm willing to lose if I don't get anything. The thing is, it's done by a graduate student. And how are you going to communicate this to a student saying, what, it's not only this project, it's possibly your future that I can afford to lose. But what is going to be the response from that person? So this is a question that we have about the effectuation principle if you apply them from the individual level to the organizational level. So this is the core part that we are working. That is, if you are going to apply effectuation at the organizational level, what is going to be the impact on the middle level managers? Are you going to be involved, or are they going to say, I want to stay away from this kind of firm? So this is something that we don't know so far. And I just finished the first few pages of this article 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm also doing some other things. If you look at me, if you build some stereotypes, you probably say, you look very international, and you're correct. I'm also doing something in the field of international business related to the digital platforms, such as Amazon, such as Airbnb. I'm also doing something on immigrant entrepreneurship. Well, it looks like an immigrant I am, and I'm also doing that to look at how immigrants come to Canada and acquire local firms, and what are those issues that they may have during the process. I don't look like a person from the future, but I still do something AI related. That's something that I really want to do. There are many other things that I want to do. One thing is really about administrative burden. I think that's something that I'm truly interested in, but at the same time, I'm asking myself, how much time am I willing to lose if I don't get anything out of that research? Because it's interesting, but it doesn't really go anywhere in your publication. And I will do many other things related to entrepreneurship. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wenlong. That was a great presentation. I liked your examples there. So we are moving on now to our final speaker, which is Dr. Katie Szilagyi, and she is joining us from the Faculty of Law. Her research focuses on legal theory of artificial intelligence, so that's a nice flow from the previous slide. She's also working on algorithmic decision-making, autonomous weapons, and blockchain. And her keywords are artificial intelligence, machine learning, generative AI, legal theory, and philosophy of law. The floor is yours, Katie.
All right. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here today. I appreciate the invitation. And it's exciting to go last. I got to hear all these fabulous projects that are being done in other faculties. Congratulations to all the speakers today. It was really wonderful to hear from you. So as has been already introduced, my name is Katie Szilagyi, and I am an assistant professor in the Faculty of Law, where I'm really focused on thinking about the intersection between artificial intelligence and the way the law works. And you see right now, AI is kind of having its aha moment, right? Everyone is very excited about it. A lot of the times it's just statistics with better marketing, but it has managed to capture the public consciousness right now. And people are really interested in ways that AI can be used to ameliorate different circumstances, right? You want to add AI into long-standing business models. You want to add it into hiring and firing practices. You want to add it into medicine and healthcare. There's all of these ways that people are excited about what data-driven solutions and what machine learning algorithms might be able to do given the huge amount of data that we now have in our world. And of course, when we start getting excited about the applicability of new technology, people often also think, well, how might it work in the law, right? What are the ways in which we might integrate artificial intelligence into both the business of law, so what lawyers do on a day-to-day basis, but also the judicial system, right? We have a whole panoply of areas where individuals, as they go through their lives, are going to interact with the judicial system in some capacity. For a lot of us, it'll be administrative tribunals, right? Different things to do with employment insurance, with pensions, with immigration, with the Canadian Revenue Agency, right? Different facets of the law that are kind of under that broad umbrella of administrative law. And then, of course, some of us will also have experiences with the family law system or with the criminal justice system. And so when we think about how these processes are integrated into legal spaces, that really touches a lot of our lives in interesting ways. And there are a lot of things that we can talk about in terms of how to regulate those technologies, the types of legal mechanisms that might be used to promote innovation or to forestall changes happening too quickly. And above all else, making sure that our legal system remains safe, remains accurate, remains efficient, and remains capable of dispensing justice in a way that we feel is legitimate and that we feel is able to organize our society around something. And so that's the central question that I'm most interested in investigating, is whether we're able to use algorithmic justice in a way that might preserve the rule of law. And you heard from Joseph just a couple presentations ago about the rule of law a little bit, so I won't go too deeply into it other than to say that in a democratic society, the rule of law is something that people tend to be very passionate about. They also tend to throw it around without necessarily knowing what it means, right? It's sort of one of those suitcase words that can be used and unpacked to mean a lot of different things depending on what you want to connote. It can refer to things being non-arbitrary, of general application, rules that are only prospective as opposed to retroactive, right? This idea that the law applies to all of us equally and nobody is going to be singled out, that there aren't going to be abuses of power, and that the democratic framework is going to work the way that it should. And so what worries me when we start thinking a lot about using AI in legal applications is the conversion of a rule of law into a rule by law, where instead of engaging in the legal process, instead of being really specific to given fact situations and having the opportunity to be heard, that there's a possibility that under the name of efficiency, that there is a chance of abuses of power sort of working their way into our legal fabric. And what's particularly interesting is to think about that intersection between the technology companies themselves, so the people who are producing those types of technologies, and the way that the legal system works. Because typically, although courts are not perfect, they have some degree of legislative or democratic oversight that governs the way that they function. And when we start to introduce new technologies, especially brand new ones that haven't necessarily been tested in the marketplace and haven't been investigated or controlled by regulators, there's a possibility for a lot of those design features to have undesirable effects and to impact the way that power is allocated within our democratic system, which is a dangerous balance, right? It's a careful way that we think about power, and we don't want to disrupt it too badly. And so when I think about this area of law, I like to call these ideas self-driving laws, right? Because there's a degree to which they are informed by data, in which machine learning algorithms are building off the data sets that we have, and there's a hope that we're going to achieve those goals of efficiency by integrating them into our system. And there are a lot of different examples that we could think through in terms of the ways that these things are problematic. I'll give 3 quick examples here. The first is this idea of sentencing software. And so that comes to us often in this idea that you could use an algorithm to calculate how long would be an appropriate quantum for someone to spend incarcerated. The next would be facial recognition technology, which has a number of broad applications. But I like to think about it under a heading of privacy law, right? How do we think about our right to privacy within our society? And finally, I think about the future of law, right? What are the ways in which generative AI applications like ChatGPT or GPT-4 are impacting the propagation of information, and how might that bleed into the legal sphere in some ways? So we can think about a really famous study called machine bias, right? This is a technology called COMPAS. It's not used in Canada, but it's broadly used in the United States for calculating pre-trial risk assessments, and is often used to inform sentencing decisions. And what was determined is that when you take, a swath of data based on our historical past, grappling with legacies that we might not be so comfortable with, we see racial discrimination that is propagated through those kinds of data sets, and that the algorithms tend to recommend longer sentences for Black offenders than for white offenders, due to a higher likelihood of recidivism or possibility of reoffending for those Black offenders. Is that true? How do you engage with that data? And how do we deliver ourselves to a future that we want if we have a data set that is anchored in the past? Another one is facial recognition technologies, right? Thinking through how are we using this kind of tech to measure our facial geometries. Most of us will remember early 2020, huge hubbub around the use of Clearview AI by Canadian police forces. The RCMP, many different groups around Canada were found to be using these sort of facial recognition technologies in order to identify criminals, in order to interact with mugshots and data sets. And again, a technology that largely reflects the abilities of the programmers. So if you have a number of white Silicon Valley men doing the predominance of the programming, that's who it's going to be most able to identify correctly. Lots of research has shown it's less good for identifying women, less good for identifying Black faces, particularly bad at identifying Black women. And then finally, the thing that I've had a lot of conversations about in the last few months is about generative AI in particular, and what is it going to look like to use these sorts of systems for the marshaling of knowledge going forwards. You see here at the bottom this little note, ChatGPT can make mistakes, consider checking important information. And yet the degree of reliance that often gets imparted into technological systems is informed by these phenomena of automation bias and automation complacency, where when people interact with technological systems, they tend to have a degree of trust in those systems and defer to those systems when they interact with them. And so when you sort of combine those ideas with the way that the legal system is designed to produce knowledge, the way that there's this epistemic idea that legal knowledge has been tested in court and is capable of doing things, there are some troubling concerns from a philosophy of law perspective. You've also probably heard in the news in the last few months, lawyers erroneously relying on ChatGPT in preparation of their briefs and citing hallucinated cases that don't exist and being reprimanded by the courts for doing so. So it's at an interesting time because as lawyers sort of pursue their craft, they're often motivated by ideas of efficiency, right? This sense of getting the best service for the client, doing something as quickly as possible. And artificial intelligence, or statistics with better marketing, purports to help them in achieving those goals. And yet, what I'd like to think through are some of the consequences for the philosophy of law. So just a quick snapshot of a few things. Glad to share these ideas with you, and happy to talk further about any of them if you're interested. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, Katie. That was fascinating, and thanks for giving that example about the Silicon Valley. That's why we need a diverse research team. So with that, I hope that you enjoyed the presentations, and what we're going to do now is the question and answer round. So I'm going to look at the people in the room if they have a question. And James, are you monitoring online? Yes? Okay, awesome. And we have the first question there, or maybe not. There was a side conversation there. So maybe I will ask the first question since I wanted to be a paleontologist. So what I truly wonder about, so you see all the dinosaurs in books and things, and some have lovely colors and some are sort of grayish, greenish. How do we know what color the dinosaurs were?
Thank you. That's a great question. Oftentimes, the colors that are depicted in books are just the result of the artists that drew them. So people will often pull inspiration from nature, so they'll make them look like modern animals, like they're trying to camouflage in somewhere. So there'll be more muted colors, or they might make them look like a bird, so then they'll have very vibrant colors, because we know dinosaurs and birds are very closely related. We do know the colors of some of the feathered dinosaurs by looking at the detailed microstructure of the feathers. We can actually look at different colors are reflected in different shapes and sizes of these cells called melanosomes. So we can actually tell that some of the feathered dinosaurs had black with white stripes or had a little bit of red coloration on them. So that's as close as we've gotten to figuring out color in the dinosaurs.
Thank you. Mario has a question.
Thanks, Annemieke. Before my questions, let me just say to all the speakers, fascinating. University of Manitoba has obviously chosen well, and you're destined for great careers. I have several questions of different people. I could ask all of you questions, but let me focus my thoughts here regarding entrepreneurship. What's the critical go-no decision point when an affordable loss becomes non-affordable?
Thank you. It's working? Okay. Good question. So far, our current research shows is you don't really want to turn unaffordable into, you don't want to turn affordable loss into something unaffordable. So it's almost like at the very beginning you have to decide that this is going to be the amount of resource that I'm willing to lose. And then you will experiment and you get some initial information. Hopefully by even before you get to the maximum limit of your affordable loss level, you have already made up your final decision. And the core criteria, I think, in that case is there are several things people should consider. That is, together with affordable loss, you also have experimentation. So you try different ideas and you collect information and initial signals about their success or failure.
Okay.
Thank you.
This becomes a practical question if you're setting up a startup business, right?
Yes.
And you are experimenting. and at some point, you have to call it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And you may have a no-go decision point.
True.
Just wondering if theoretically you've been able to quantify that of when one should bail. Coming back to the canoe analogy here.
Very good one. We don't know. So far, I think our research doesn't really tell an exact number, but what we have seen is the general hypothesis that our researchers have is for different entrepreneurs, the kind of level that you have about affordable loss is going to be different. For example, if you look at a millionaire who has, let's say, who has 5 million to invest, and then somebody who has 200,000 to invest, the kind of affordable loss level will be different. That's why we actually give the example to say you have a supervisor who has 10 graduate students, and your affordable level is probably saying, like, if one student is going to fail, that's okay. But then for the student who is going to have this sole project for her own life for the next several years, and she's going to say, no, that's going to destroy my academic career. So it really depends on individual perception.
Right. We won't talk about collateral damage. Okay. I have a question for you on mental health issues. Very interesting talk. I just returned from Alberta last night, where I was involved in a serious discussion about the impending wildfire season coming this summer. As you indicated, there is no snow cap, virtually none, and so they're predicting a worse season than last year. At the same time, all the lakes are drying up. All right? So given all that, and given what you know, are you aware of any programs at the government level to prepare the public for what's to come in terms of mental health, anxiety in general?
Unfortunately, there is nothing. It's just being ignored, and that's why these kind of research are important. There is nothing. Like, my research is the first that, except for like epidemiological papers that look at, like, surveyed people who are in the hospital, asking whether you were worried about environmental factor. There is no other paper, and that's why there is no consideration in policies of mental health. And I think mental health became more important just after COVID. Even health effect of these fires are not well documented in policy recommendations.
I think your work has tremendous implications for informing policy. So I wish you well.
That's the start. Janet Carey was one of the very important influencer when they were making WHO including health impact of pollution into consideration. And I'm hoping, because her recommendation is different from other people somehow, it can, like, make this more successful. But I think we have a long way to go in terms of including mental health cost of climate change into policy recommendation. Right. But this is just a start, and I'm hoping that it go long way.
Right. Good, thank you. And finally, I don't want to dominate the question period, but I couldn't resist asking a question on migration. Your big fish analogy is fascinating, right? So given the turmoil that the big fish leaves, what is the motivation and driving force for a lot of migrants to go back home?
That's an interesting question. So motivation could be the same one. I mean, that's their first place, they're motivating to migrate. As I said, that pull factor is not really that comes in their mind first. First is the push factor. So they feel a big push, extreme push in their country of origin, whether it is insecurity, whether it is natural disaster, whether it's civil war, something like that. So when they come back here, and you see that something I say from my ontological perspective is that nobody wants to migrate from their place of birth. Everyone has so much connection through their birthplace, that even I say it all the time when I share my experience, that I have been here in Canada for the last 10 years. I came in 2014 for my PhD study at the McGill University. So still, when I dream, I mean my real dream, I mean at night, when I dream, when I sleep, in my dream, I never have a complete dream of Canadian dream. In my every single dream, there is part of my childhood, part of my birth. So maybe I start with a dream in Canadian context, but I move to regress to the Bangladeshi dream again. So what I'm saying, I have that deep connection. So what happens, you have that connection. Now when you will feel that there is a safer or something, or you can reunite, so you will take every opportunity. And that's why reverse migration concept. So many people are now migrating, doing reverse migration to China, to India, and many other countries. That's happening, that's taking place. So the moment you feel like that, okay, there is no extreme push there, you might remigrate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mario. And I'm looking around the room if there are any questions that anyone has, or maybe online. Maybe I will ask a question then. So Bruce and Mohammad, you both are interested in social justice. I wish everyone was interested in social justice, but unfortunately that's not the case. And I was just wondering, how did you become interested? Were you interested from when you were very, very young, or did something happen in your life that you suddenly became interested? I'm curious about that.
Thank you. Again, you will take me back to my childhood. I come from Bangladesh, and I'm an immigrant. In fact, my childhood was really, really very hard. I shared that story in my job application even. One of my colleagues here, I think he had the opportunity to read my job application. I shared that story. So I was born in a remote island. It's in the river of Brahmaputra. I just had, elementary school there, no middle school, high school. And for a decade, from 1980s to 1992, something like 12 years, my family went through a very hardship, financial crisis, economic crisis. Due to river erosion, we lost all our assets and properties. So my family was in a real hardship. And we had a time that my parents didn't have the opportunity to eat twice a day for a time being. So it was really hard. At that time I was a child, I'm a growing child. And I just, thought about why some people, have resources to eat sufficiently and why some people don't. That's kind of a, haunting question I had since my childhood. And you see, I study economic justice. And that's why I say that maybe there are so much economic growth here or there, but if you do not have really a good distribution system, there is no point to have all this growth. You see, so if I bring the example of Nobel laureate economist Amartya Sen, what he studied, that Bengal famine, the great famine in Bengal, when there was a British Empire in India. So his studies say that there was no shortage of food in India at that time. There was plenty. The problem was purchasing capacity. People didn't have the purchasing capacity to access those food. And that's why millions of people died that time in Bengal famine. Still that's happening right now. So much growth. We are growing so much crops around the world. But go back to some African countries, Ethiopia, Sudan or some other countries. Still kids are dying out of hunger. So much food insecurity in many places in the world. Doesn't mean that we do not have food. We do have food. But the problem is, it's the equitable distribution of economic resources and opportunities. And that's why I'm so, it's not just my interest, it's something very tied to what I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Mohammad. Thank you.
Yeah, that's like the $1 million question, right? And I think, so I grew up with a lot of privilege, but I think one of the things that sort of when I look back is that these kind of questions were always somewhere in my life, whether it was the school that I was in or the kind of circle that I ran in. And so that kind of was always something that I've thought about and seemed important because of those circles. But then I think another important thing is that I would say I probably came up more within the environmental circle, and in thinking about how to sort of get the goals that we were interested in and wanted to see, which anybody that has worked in environmental groups knows that, you know, that's a story of failure, right? Of over and over and over again. And so it seemed clear to me that actually the only way to actually make these advances is through pairing questions of environmental degradation with questions of equity and inequality and social justice. And so that seemed to be the key dimension to making any of those sort of discussions part and parcel together.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you. So I'm going around again. Everyone is thinking hard about maybe some questions that they can ask. Yes, I have a volunteer here.
I have a question for Joseph. And when we, before we started the meeting, I was actually talking about corruption. At one time, I was really interested in doing some research on corruption at firms, because there tend to be quite a few corruptions, especially with large business, but it's just very difficult to catch those things, and it's just very difficult to do research in that area. So is there any progress that you have seen about how to measure those things, how to assess the different corruption at the firm level or at the governmental level?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, corruption is difficult to measure, to assess, because it's something that takes place under the cover. I mean, it doesn't take place openly. Yeah, so it's only those that have been exposed that we get to know of. But there are ways to at least capture the extent of corruption in the country. So, for example, we have Transparency International Corruption Index that asks people, professionals, academics, business people, and so on and so forth, about the extent of corruption they believe exists in a particular country, and they are picked from that particular country. So every country, they do that. Canada is part of it. So if you look at it, you can see the ranking where Canada is and other countries are. So these are people, for example, businesses who may have interacted with politicians, maybe trying to get alliances, and then they are asked to pay money and so on and so forth. Some of them trying to clear goods from the ports, and they have to pay money. For example, in the case of Ghana, money that's not legal, not talking about legal fees. And so they have an idea of the extent to which there is corruption in a particular country. So that is one way. We also have international surveys, that look at, for example, we have one by Yuan that look at in Ghana, and then so they interview, people, service users, government officials, and so on and so forth. And that also, they do that for different countries, and that also, give us an extent of corruption. And then in the African context, we have African Afrobarometer survey. That is also very important, and they interview people across the country, and that also gives us the extent of corruption in different departments, whether it's executive, parliament, like a wide range of areas. But then we also have investigative journalists, so they go under the cover, and normally they are tipped off by, they are given information by people who are working within specific institutions, who are against corruption and who have witnessed how corruption is going on. And then the journalists, not all journalists, independent journalists, because most of them are also corrupt. And then they investigate. For example, recently there was an investigation, Public Procurement Authority in Ghana, and procurement is always one of the areas where corruption is very, very rampant. And so they were not doing competitive bidding, and they were giving the contracts to people they know with the prices or inflicted and so on and so forth. So a journalist was tipped off by a member, somebody who was working in that particular authority, and then he did the investigation, and that investigation documentary is titled Contracts for Sale. So talking about government contracts and so on and so forth. And so that also helped to know what is going on. So I have investigative journalists and people that I work with. That helped me to also if I want to do any like the one I did, to be able to get to speak with people in government and so on and so forth. Otherwise, it's very difficult if you don't have those connections. It's very difficult, to get somebody to speak with you because nobody wants to talk about it. Okay, so these are some of the ways that at least you can get to find out the extent of corruption, and then having connections with people on the ground, like investigative journalists who are committed to it, and then by so doing, at least you get a sense of what is happening. Thank you very much. Long answer.
No, thank you very much. I was also going to ask you, so if you're high on the corruption list, so let's say you were in the top 10 most corrupt countries, based on that index that you were talking about, are there any penalties? So for example, if there are donor countries, do they look at that list and say, oh, we're not going to support the top 10 most corrupt countries? Or is it more something that's there but not really used as such?
I would say it's very important, and it may be put to different use depending on the interests of the donors and so on and so forth. For example, that survey is a way to give a sense of how much corruption is in a country for people who are looking forward to invest in other countries. And these days, like almost every country is trying to, attract investment into their country. And so in some way, they don't want to be seen as highly corrupt. And so that adds to the pressure for them to make sure that, they do something about fighting corruption. So that is one way. And then another way for donor agencies and so on and so forth, they also, before they give foreign aid or something of that sort, they have conditions that will, sort of trying to ensure that the aid will be put to the very use for which is being given. So they will have to have conditions. Sometimes they will have to have a member of that particular donor being present on the field and so on and so forth. So that is also another way. So it's not, I will not say it's not there for fun, at least. It has important uses, and some of them. And it's also, for example, when it comes to domestic politics, for example, in the case of Ghana, it piles up pressure on the incumbent government because it gives an idea, okay, you said you wanted to fight corruption, that was part of your manifesto, but it's not the case. We are doing much worse in terms of where we are on the index. And that also is the pressure, and they try to, kind of do something about corruption. Not too much, but at least they sack people who have been publicly known as being involved in corruption. In this case, the head of the Public Procurement Authority was sacked. But sometimes we want to, government to go further in terms of prosecuting and so on and so forth. So it helps in some ways. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Muriel has another question.
I have one serious question and one a question for curiosity. First, the serious question. Katie, the rates of incarceration and the lengths of incarceration of Indigenous peoples in Canada far outstrips the corresponding rates for white Caucasians. Right? Didn't need any AI methods, didn't need any deep learning, so there's an intrinsic bias in the system. So my question is, can you use your methods in the opposite sense, right, to identify that bias and to correct for that bias and to use this as a teaching tool for those making the decisions? Because there's absolutely no doubt there's a preconceived bias. The same pattern is reflected in Australia. Right? So.
Yeah, it's a great question. That's actually chapter 6 of my PhD dissertation.
So
I can direct you there. So yeah, so what we see in the dominant literatures are American, right? So they're reflecting the difference between black offenders and white offenders. But if we look in our Canadian prisons, the difference is definitely between Indigenous and non-Indigenous populations, and stronger, right? Because the rate of incarceration of Indigenous offenders is extremely high. And so within the sentencing process, there is, forgive me if you know this already, but there's a process called the GLADU process, which is intended to take into account the individual experiences of Indigenous offenders. And so this comes from a 1999 case that was heard by the Supreme Court of Canada, which was the first case that applied those new sentencing factors from section 718.2 sub E of the Criminal Code, which was supposed to think through, okay, so what were the mitigating factors in this person's life, right? Did they have a legacy of abuse, of addiction, of family disruption because of residential schools, so on and so forth? And that those kind of reports would come into consideration only at the end of the judicial process, right? In terms of sentencing, with some sort of hope of restorative justice being part of the goal. And so those reports kind of came into common practice in the early 2000s with Indigenous offenders. Problematically, they really haven't completely solved the problem yet, and some people argue that maybe they haven't done as much as they could. There's another case in the Supreme Court in 2012 called Ipili that kind of says this hasn't worked. And so this is sort of the legacy that we're grappling with. What I think is particularly interesting about sort of that trajectory towards more algorithmic ways of making these determinations is that focus on past data tends to propagate the same problems into the future. In terms of turning it on its head, I mean, I think it's an exciting idea, but that isn't usually the way that AI and machine learning algorithms tend to work, right? Because the way they work is, look at all this past data, we can predict the future based on the past. And that's a problem for a bunch of reasons. But often what I like to think about is when we're thinking about the law, we want to think about the law as a story that we're telling through the common law, one that we're able to project a narrative into the future. And so that's what those GLADU reports are theoretically supposed to do, is inject the lived narrative of the person being sentenced. And so what will happen if you do have that? There's a 2018 case from the Supreme Court of Canada called the Crown and Ewart, which considers algorithmic risk assessment tools in the context of corrections. And it was an Indigenous man who said, you know, these risk assessment tools are not designed for me. They're not designed for someone of my experience. And the Supreme Court sort of thought through those questions at that time, but didn't really come out the way that advocates would have liked it. So it continues to be a live question, that's for sure.
But I think disruptive AI techniques and not the normal AI modes are going to be critical to deal with things like intergenerational trauma. Otherwise, we're just going to keep repeating that cycle, right? And psychologists will tell you this, certainly. But if the entire system is biased towards using past practice, and the law, I appreciate, has to do this, right, with precedent. But it seems to me if we're going to make a big move, do, as you said, turn it on its head, right? That's what we have to do here. So I hope you'll do that. And my more flippant question, our first speaker, your talk of lips fascinated me, and I've always been intrigued by the lips of rhinoceros, okay? So there are two types of rhinoceros, black and white, and the white rhinoceros really gets its name from being wide rhinoceros because the lips of a white rhinoceros are wider, right? And it's a square lip, they call it. So it's a wide lip on a white rhinoceros. Would there be any advantage to having wide lips?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Oh. There we go.
It's a grazing behavior. It's because white rhinoceroses, or wide, W-I-D-E, eat grass versus black eat leaves off of trees. Sorry.
Thank you. Mystery solved. That's great. I know there's a question there. Sheila.
Thanks to all the speakers. They're fascinating. I think I'd like to ask you a question about your study. I was intrigued by, I'm sorry I can't remember the name of the marker you spoke of, or the pollutant, but their connection of that actually to the brain and the nervous system, and then parlaying that into a connection to mental health. I was wondering if you could speak a bit more on what the actual impact is and what mental health conditions those connections are associated with.
That's a great question. One pollutant that the link is very clear, it's lead, and I think the study that you are mentioning is looking at effect of lead. Lead is a very different pollutant because as long as once you inhale it, it doesn't go away. It will accumulate in your brain and in your body. But PM2.5, they have a shorter lifetime in your body. Like within 8 hours, they will go away, but they have certain negative effect. So looking at medical literature, this area is still evolving. There is no clear and certain answer yet, but we know that for sure PM2.5, which is, I think, the trickiest pollutant out there because it's very, very small, and no matter how well your isolation system, ventilation system is, the penetration rate between outdoor and indoor is around 90%. So even staying indoor when it's fire around doesn't help. What it helps is that you reduce your outdoor activity, because then you inhale less than like usual activity, but like even mask and stuff doesn't really help. And there is literature that's showing when they scan your brain or when they put mice into cage while they expose them into PM2.5, they engage into more aggressive behavior. They are more impatient, and part of their brain is affected, but still is evolving. There is no clear. What I saw in this paper was just short-term effect, and it was like I saw a significant effect on working age group, like 20 to 64 years age, on anxiety, substance-related disorder, and mood, depression. So if you are having depression, PM2.5 inhalation of pollutants might cause you trigger an attack, substance-related disorder, alcohol, or other things. So you see the sky, you start drinking, and anxiety is, I think climate anxiety is one of the channels that can cause anxiety.
Yeah, I was just thinking it would be hard to discern the actual impact of the biochemical changes from the pollutant versus just the emotional state in the event itself.
Yeah, like for example, a schizophrenic among elder, I expected to see some effect, but I didn't see any, at least short-term effect. But there is papers that show those that are already having, like living near roads for elderly for long time can increase number of schizophrenic or dementia, but I didn't see any short-term effect. You're
Just
right.
one other quick point. We hear a lot about North American fires like California, out west here. I don't maybe I'm just not as aware of other continents and the impact of climate change on increasing fire risk on other continents. I was just wondering if you could enlighten me on that as well.
Australia is having lots of bushfires.
Yes, right.
Yes. There are some stances in Europe, but mainly it's in Australia and North America.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you for the question. I also have a question if there is no one.
Yes, I just want to mention the University of Manitoba just got awarded a very large CFI, IF, on Air Safe, it's called, and it's about air pollution, including what you are working on. The names of the researchers are Loco and Murashi. It was a U of M news story, so maybe you want to connect with them if you haven't yet.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
And you had a question, or? Yeah. You're multitasking now.
Sure. I have a question from Katie. I have a paper showing that immigrant judges in US, they're affected by temperature. Days that, like on asylum seeker, days that is hotter, they say yes less, no matter what, like controlling for the quality of asylum seeker. And there are other papers showing that judges before breakfast, before lunch, they are more, like their behavior has been changed. What I was hoping was that, like, I think we all Google for by now that which jobs are going to be replaced by AI, and judges are one of them. What do you think? Do you think this is possible? And if it is it for good or is it for bad? Just because of this irrelevant cost that human being, like they're affected. We all have hormones, right? We are affected by irrelevant factors, no matter what, right?
Yeah. So this is a great question. This is chapter 3 of my PhD dissertation. So those studies are really interesting, right? So there's the study that shows, is done by a number of Israeli academics, that judges first thing in the morning will give you a more lenient sentence, and then as the morning goes on and they get hungrier and they are more in need of a break, the length of the sentence goes up, and then it drops off again after lunch, and then it goes up, and then after coffee time, and then, so like the best thing that you can do if you want to have a lenient sentence is not have a good lawyer, it's just like make sure you're scheduled first thing in the day, right? And the same charges are made about whether it's sunny outside or whether it's raining. If it's very hot and judges are uncomfortable. There's a really interesting one out of Louisiana where judges who are alumni of Louisiana State University give higher sentences the day after the football team loses versus if the football team has performed well, right? So these are the types of studies that people from the field of critical legal studies or kind of American legal realists will rely on to say, hey, look at the judicial system. It's biased. Judges are not actually impartial. We have kind of elevated judges to be this thing that they're not because of the fundamental human frailties that exist. There's also follow-on studies to most of those that say, wait a second, these effects are somewhat overblown, right? And what I actually think is interesting is we understand that people make mistakes, and then we look at a technological solution, and then we demand perfection of that solution. So you see that a lot with self-driving cars, right? People get into car accidents all the time, and yet when we think about using self-driving cars to replace human drivers, we expect perfection from those cars before we're going to allow them to be on the road. So that you can see the same kind of conversation happening around using judges in an AI context. But I would say that there's something a little bit different there because the way that the data sets are used, right, you have all of these past experiences that are steeped in, we know them to be steeped in bias, steeped in misogyny, steeped in racism, all those sorts of things. And so this expectation that the data set is going to be impartial, that the data set is going to be better and more efficient than a human decision maker isn't borne out in practice, because we just don't have that kind of data. What we have when we're propagating the common law, right, is we have a continuation of a story that we've been telling for hundreds of years. You know, most of the common law jurisdictions in the world, the law all goes back to feudal England. And there's at least a thread that connects those stories all through time. And some of them are replaced with statutes at different instances, right? But all of those statutes still are inspired by the same ideas, the same legal principles. And so when you're trying to propagate that into the future, what kind of data set do you have to rely upon? And then what kind of decisions do you have? Are you going to have bias? So that's one problem. Another problem is this idea of kind of like technological legal lock-in, right? This idea of like a set it and forget it mentality. So are you going to continuously reevaluate? Are you going to make improvements? Or are you just going to come up with a legal system and say, okay, it's good to go, and then I'm not going to be continuously evaluating it? And we see these psychological phenomena, like I mentioned, about automation bias, right? Automation complacency, this sense that we have to defer to technological solutions because we think that they're better than people, right? Those Compass pretrial sentencing reports that I mentioned, they're really specifically, they were designed originally to be used within the correction system. They weren't ever supposed to be used for judicial decision making. And then over time, they sort of seeped into these different areas. And people are like, oh yeah, it kind of works here. But it's not designed for that, and it actually doesn't work that well. But once people see that in black and white, the tendency for judges to be influenced by those kind of AI determinations is really high. And so actually it's like that corporate influence kind of bleeds into the system. So in my view, I think judging should be one of those things that is insulated from those things, at least for now, because the type of technological solution that you're going to have is not going to be sufficient.
Thank you very much. And I feel that we all should read Thesis of Katie over the weekend, because there seems to be a lot of interesting stuff in there. So with that, unfortunately, we are out of time, because I want to leave some time for people here to mingle and have some coffee, and there's some goodies there as well. I would like to thank you all in the room for being here. Also, thank you very much online. I really appreciated your participation. I enjoyed today. Nice discussion, wonderful topics, important work. So thank you, speakers, for letting us know what you are working on, and continued success in your career. The next session is about a month from now, on April 23rd at 9 a.m., so early morning again, and that's on the Benetine campus in the Apotex Center. So I hope to see you there, and many more people, and I hope you enjoy it, and have a lovely day and a good long weekend. So thank you very much.